By the evening of the 9th of June, we were on the hills north of F6 camp. We moved quietly, for no one was supposed to know of our presence. We had to exploit the effect of surprise. We could see the little harbour, in which lay 2 British destroyers. They were obviously there for the evacuation. We could see the promenade with pretty villas and a casino, as we supposed. In the harbour and on the streets, we could detect a good deal of enemy movement. The French and British seemed to be preparing for embarkation. To our astonishment, neither the harbour nor the town itself was secured by outposts on the high ground. No one seemed to be expecting us. The evening sun bathed this pretty resort in a warm light. Bearing in mind the relative forces and the presence of the 2 destroyers, I thought of a plan for the following morning, which I explained that evening to the company commanders and the leader of the 88 battery. The hills before F6 camp will be occupied by the motorcycle escorts. The armoured scout cars will hold back, so that they can intervene where necessary. The heavy company will secure the motorcycle escorts. The 88S will be positioned on the cliffs in such a way that they can attack the 2 destroyers, both in the harbour and at sea should they leave it. Everything must be done without attracting attention. No loud commands, no unnecessary vehicle movements. I sent for Kardorf, my orderly officer. Kardorf spoke fluent French, having attended a French school in Berlin. Kardorf, tomorrow morning you will go to F6 camp with a runner and a white flag, ask for the local commander, and demand the surrender of the whole garrison. Tell him that the town is surrounded on all sides, and that the 2 destroyers must leave the harbour immediately without taking anyone on board. All clear. Early in the morning Kardorf went off. We saw him disappear into the town. Would my trick work? After a short time Kardorf came back. The mayor and the French commandant seemed to agree, but the British flatly decline. What now? I could not lose face, so had to go on with the game. Toward 10 a.m. I sent for Kardorf once more. Go into the town again and tell the mayor that I should like to spare his beautiful resort. He might care to exert his influence on the Allied commanders in the interests of the inhabitants. There is no escape, only unnecessary loss. If the garrison again declines to surrender, I will open fire on the town and harbour at 12 o'clock with every gun, and call up the Luftwaffe for bombardment. Kardorf went into the town once more, and again came back with a refusal. I sent for the company commanders and the leader of the 88 battery. We shall have to keep our word now, and open fire on the town punctually at 12 o'clock, I said. Apart from the 88S, I had only a 3.7 centimeters anti-tank gun, the 2 centimeters guns of the scout cars, and the normal machine gun equipment of the motorcycle escorts. So my orders were, punctually at 1200 hours fire will be opened from every gun, including signal pistols, to pretend that we were stronger than we really are. The 88S will try to set the destroyers on fire, aim for the gun turrets and the bridges. Everybody made preparations. We were in a strange mood. No one wanted to destroy this famous resort. At 11:30, a civilian came up the hill. He held a white cloth in his hand. He was brought before me. "What's going on in the town, monsieur? Why does not your mayor surrender the place?" I asked him. "Tell me where the British are and which buildings are important." The man said he had been afraid, and that was why he had run away. The British were mainly in the harbour, preparing the embarkation. They were clearing out and leaving us to our fate. Please spare the town. Look, the building over there is the old Benedictine monastery. There in the middle is the old town hall, and there on the promenade is our casino. I put 2 and 2 together and asked, "The monastery, is that where the famous Benedictine liqueur is made?" "Yes, that is the place," he replied. At that I sent for the commanders again and gave directions. The monastery, the town hall, and the casino are not to be touched. Concentrate on the harbour and the radio station. The 88S will destroy the radio station first, and then concentrate on the destroyers. Luck was on our side. A few minutes before 12, a squadron of Luftwaffe bombs flew over the town, obviously on their way to England. In addition, one machine dropped 3 bombs, whether by mistake or to hit the destroyers we did not know. At the same moment I ordered fire. A somewhat ineffective but nonetheless intensive hail of shots fell on the harbour like fireworks. We all had to laugh as blue, red and yellow tracer ammunition provided a backdrop. Suddenly a white flag went up over the town hall. Capitulation. The 2 destroyers left the harbour full steam ahead and began to shoot at our positions. Unfortunately, that cost us a few casualties, until the 88S managed to hit one of the destroyers, which continued its voyage under a smokescreen. I at once ordered ceasefire and summoned Kardorf. We will both go into the town now and arrange the surrender. At that moment, a couple of Wellington bombers came flying toward us. The 88S opened fire immediately. One machine went down in flames. The crew hung from their parachutes and landed right in my positions. "You were in luck," I greeted them. "You will be staying here with me for the time being." We then set off in a scout car on our journey into the town, where the mayor handed me the key to the resort. "Monsieur le Maire, I ordered your town hall, the monastery, and the casino not to be hit out of respect for these historic buildings. La guerre est finie pour vous. Bring the inhabitants out of the cellars, open the shops. We will pay in genuine currency. Nothing will happen to any of you. In all those weeks I'd seldom seen such a grateful and surprised Frenchman as that mayor. While I stayed with him, I sent Kardorf up the hill to bring the commanders to me. I ordered the southern hills to be occupied, the radio station to be switched off, and feelers to be put out to the south by reconnaissance patrols. The town was to be hermetically sealed on all sides. Half of every unit was to have a few hours free in turn, to take a bath in the sea and to go shopping. I reported by radio to Rommel that F6 camp had been captured with light casualties, only a half dozen, that many French and British had been made prisoner, nearly 200 men, and that protective measures had been taken to the south. Rommel radioed back, "Bravo von Luck. You remain responsible for the town. My ultimatum for the surrender of St. Val 6 Rye has been rejected. I am preparing bomb attacks and an attack with tanks." The following day, Rommel radioed, "St. Valery has surrendered. Several generals, including the commander of the 51st Highland Division, and thousands of prisoners taken. The division has 1 to 2 days rest. We were overjoyed." On the spur of the moment, I asked Rommel by radio, "Can you send me the divisional band? The inhabitants are grateful and friendly. In addition, I have sealed off the town on all sides, even to German visitors, except for you personally, of course. Have I your agreement?" Rommel understood a bit of fun. He was in a good mood after his success, and consented to both the band and the sealing off of the town. With the major and my adjutant, I now viewed the resort. We first visited the Benedictine monastery, where we were greeted to the abbot. "Monsieur EABB 6. I should have called him Monseigneur. I heard about your monastery at the last minute before the shelling of the town, and at once ordered that no shot was to fall on your building. I hope everything is intact." The abbot thanked me effusively for our forbearance, and asked whether he might show me the monastery. I am somewhat ashamed to admit that the Benedictine liqueur was one of the decisive factors in sparing the monastery. As we descended to the cellars, I could see thousands of bottles and a large number of old barrels. "Does the famous Benedictine come from these cellars?" I asked innocently. "It certainly does, and to show our gratitude I should like to offer all your men a bottle." The abbot paled when I told him the strength of my unit, 1,100 men. But he kept his word. Since that day, I have always drunk Benedictine with particular respect. On the afternoon of 12 June, probably for the only time during the campaign, a German band gave a promenade concert in front of the casino. French and German soldiers strolled about together on the promenade, and were glad that the battle for F6 camp had been executed so bloodlessly. I instructed my hotelier, the runner with the breakfast, to do some shopping, and prepare a meal for that evening in the casino. He was now in his element. Then the mayor appeared with a German U-boat officer, whose ship had been shot up in the channel. He was the only one to be taken prisoner by the French. In the excitement of yesterday, we forgot that we had this gentleman in our prison. The mayor apologized. Sitting together at the festive table that evening were the officers of Taiwai Battalion, the successful leader of the 88 battery, a German U-boat officer, and the crew of a British Wellington bomber, besides the mayor of F6 camp. On 15 and the 16th of June, we were set on the march again. Le Havre was left alone and would be taken by other units. Rommel told us that we were now to cross the Seine. The bridges had been rebuilt and substantial bridgeheads secured. Our goal now was the naval port of Cherbourg, which had been developed as a fortress and was to become an important base for our navy. We crossed the Seine on the 17th of June and literally stormed through Normandy toward Cherbourg. On that day, we covered nearly 350 kilometers, our reconnaissance battalion, because of its greater mobility, again forming the spearhead. Early on the 18th of June, we were at the outer forts of the Cherbourg citadel. Rommel at once called for Stukas, which bombed fort after fort. On 19 June, at a formal ceremony, the French commandant surrendered the fortress. Rommel was very courteous and paid tribute to the garrison. I believe this fair attitude, which he himself always showed toward the defeated enemy, earned him respect even abroad. Rommel was already somewhat vain, but we were happy to overlook this. He always had his camera on hand to photograph the most important scenes. He was taken to task later because he had obviously improved the figures for his achievements. In the main, though, it was his unconventional mode of fighting that evoked the criticism of him, and also the envy of some senior officers. According to Rommel's account, the division had taken 97,648 prisoners in 6 weeks, against losses of its own of 1,600 dead and wounded, certainly a proud balance. We did not stop at Cherbourg, but pushed on south at once through Brittany, in the general direction of Rennes and Nantes on the Loire. A captured French captain told Rommel, as I translated, that Marshal Pétain had offered an armistice. In spite of that, we advanced further south so as to control, if possible, the whole Atlantic coast. Saint-Nazaire and La Rochelle fell into our hands. Practically no resistance was offered anymore. The stream of refugees gradually dried up. Half of Paris seemed to have fled south to the Mediterranean coast and to Bordeaux. On the 21st of June, the armistice was signed at Compipe. Of its provisos we at first heard nothing. On we went south. Bordeaux is our goal, said Rommel. When I arrived with the first elements of my reconnaissance battalion at the Gironde, a river north of Bordeaux, Rommel told us to stop. At a briefing of commanders, we heard that Pétain was still in Bordeaux with his provisional government, but would be transferring his seat to Vichy, in the part of France not to be occupied by us. You will secure the area by the river with your battalion, Rommel ordered. Give your men some time to rest. With the armistice, the French campaign is over and won. I posted an armoured patrol and some motorcycle escorts at the northern approach to the bridge. My people relaxed and behaved in exemplary fashion toward the inhabitants. Here I went through the last, this time entertaining episode of the French campaign. On the second day of our bridge watch, a runner reported, "Captain, a French colonel with a white flag has arrived and would like to speak to the local commander." I went along, greeted the colonel politely, and asked what he wanted. "Mon capitaine," he said, "General Weygand, chief of the French General Staff, requests that an authorized officer be sent to Bordeaux to make arrangements for the withdrawal of the provisional government of Marshal P. and Taine and the surrender of the city to the Wehrmacht. Your authorized officer will work with General Weygand and the mayor. He will have an office in the district army building and accommodation in the Grand Hotel. Would you kindly settle this question at once with your divisional or corps commander? I am instructed to wait here for your answer." I winked at Kardorff. "This is a job for us, Kardorff." I informed Rommel by radio and suggested, "General, I speak good French and have Kardorff as interpreter. I think I should go to Bordeaux." "Agreed," came Rommel's reply. "I take responsibility and will inform Corps headquarters. The task of the battalion remains unchanged. Hand over to your senior company commander." I was glad to have something to do, and quickly bade 2 scout cars polished up to the nines, equipped with ammunition who knew what might be happening in Bordeaux, and manned by our best crews. I settled for my jeep, and besides Kardorff, took the driver and an orderly, so our little convoy appeared at the bridge, where the French colonel was waiting. "C'est moi, madame, mon colonel. I am coming to Bordeaux with you." "Très bien, let's go." The closer we got to Bordeaux, the heavier the traffic became. The city seemed to be crammed. Many who still bad enough money had fled there from Paris. The colonel billeted me at the Grand Hotel. Next to me was Kardorfer, and rooms there were also made available for the crews of the armoured cars. I was somewhat embarrassed to think that other guests had probably been forced to vacate their rooms on our behalf. "Could we go to General Weygand now?" the colonel asked, as I returned to the hall. I agreed, and also gave my men quick directions. The 2 scout cars are to be drawn up in front of the hotel. The radio post is to be manned day and night. A guard will stand in front of each car with a machine pistol at the ready. The others will not leave the hotel. No discussion, please, with the inhabitants or the soldiers. Conduct yourself with the utmost propriety. I followed the colonel to the local military headquarters, where I was allocated an off-fire. Then, I was received by Weigand. He first expressed his thanks that we had been ready without great foreignalities to allow the removal of the provisional government under Marshal Pétain to be carried out smoothly. I was naturally very impressed to be face to face with one of the best-known French generals, who until only a few days before had been our opponent and regarded by Nazi propaganda as the arch-enemy. I tried by my deferential attitude to show him our respect as soldiers, and saw in his tired eyes how heavy that hour must have been for him. Commandant, he ended the brief audience and gave me his hand. In 2 days the French government will be able to leave Bordeaux for Vichy. The colonel will arrange with you the details of the surrender of the city to the German Wehrmacht. I never suspected at the time that Pétain and Weigand would later be accused of collaboration with the Germans and marked as traitors to their country. What a bitter end for army commanders of such distinction. On the way back to the hotel, I was told by the colonel, "There are no British in the city, but tens of thousands of French soldiers who have been called upon to hand in their weapons. Whether all have complied with the order, I do not know. We are combing through the whole city." I had a strange feeling in my stomach, and was not sure that we had not overreached ourselves with our little liaison unit. I felt as though I were in a beehive. I arranged with the colonel that I would go to my office with him the following morning. On arriving at the hotel, I inspected the guards. A lot of Frenchmen, disarmed soldiers among them, were standing around our armoured cars with angry or curious looks. For the evening meal, tables had been reserved for us on the terrace of the hotel. There, too, we met with hostile looks from many of the guests. I felt somewhat ill at ease. Yet it was pleasant to sit on the terrace. It was a fine, warm evening. In the harbour lay a neutral passenger ship. Owing to its international status, I could do nothing about it, but I knew that a lot of French people had embarked on it. I radioed to Rommel that everything was in order and reported the course of events. He told me that Army Command, meanwhile, had agreed to our mission. I was relieved. The following morning, the colonel took me, as arranged, to the office where journalists and an official of the municipal administration were waiting. The official turned to me, "Mon capitaine, it has already been decreed that no one may leave the city for the north. The disarming continues and should be finished today." Then the journalists wanted to hear from me, "What time are you setting for the couvre-feu, the curfew?" "We suggest 10 o'clock. There is a fuel depot outside the city with about 60,000 litres. It is under constant guard. We have emergencies that make it necessary for individual refugees to go to the north, especially to Paris. For that they need a laissez-passer from you and a voucher with which they can get fuel at the depot. Doctors and supply vehicles will also need a laissez-passer." I now had to make far more and more varied decisions than I had imagined when I took on the job. I reflected briefly, and I had known as follows: the curfew at 10 o'clock is agreed. We were in the middle of summer after all, and it remained light for a long time. I need until tomorrow for a stamp with which gas vouchers and laissez-passers can be officially approved. By then, I shall be able to tell you which roads may be used without disturbing our troop movements. I need a list of doctors and supply agencies which you consider necessary. I shall be here from 8 o'clock tomorrow morning and count on your continued support. Motor traffic had dwindled almost to nothing, but some soldiers were obviously carrying on a flourishing black market in army fuel. For the moment, however, I was not worrying about that. I had to know from Rommel or Army Command which roads were not to be used. During the night I was notified by division of a few roads that could be opened to the north. When I came back to the hotel, I was given some special editions of the local paper, in which my function, the location of my office, and the time of the curfew were made known. After I had eaten my evening meal on the terrace again, the captain of the neutral ship came to see me to ask whether he might put to sea. Once again, I was faced with a problem that could only be solved diplomatically or through Army Command. So I made inquiries and received the answer: the ship must remain in harbour until Bordeaux is surrendered. Further directions will follow. Since the friendly captain now had to stay in harbour, he invited me on board next day for a long foregone whisky, to sit with him in the officers' mess as in times of peace. A pleasant change awaited me. Next morning I drove to M office, this time unescorted by the Y colonel. I could not believe my eyes. Waiting for a laissez-passer was a line of hundreds of civilians. Waiting in the office itself was a venerable old woman who was introduced to me as Madame Lyautey. She was the widow of the famous Marshal Lyautey, who had played a great part in the subduing of Morocco and was regarded as a popular hero. Mon capitaine, I am an old lady who would like to go home. Can you please give me a laissez-passer and a gas voucher? I would be grateful to you. What must have been going on inside this old lady, who had to ask such a favor of a young German who had fought against her country? I gave her the papers without hesitation, and a leaflet showing which roads she was allowed to use. She thanked me very warmly. I could detect no hate in her eyes, but understanding rather, for the course of events which neither she nor I could have influenced. The road map was hectographed and handed out to all recipients of the coveted documents. At my request, a German administrator was sent to the fuel depot to supervise the issue of fuel. The day was filled with handing out documents and answering questions. In this, I had strong support from Kardorf, and we were both glad when, in the late afternoon, we were able to return to the hotel, then to restore ourselves with a whiskey on board the ship. Pétain removal to Vichy was scheduled for the following day. The surrender of the city was also being prepared, so in 2 days I would be free of my unaccustomed work. That evening our Moor in the hotel had just served coffee. "What do you think?" I asked Kardorfer. "Should we go somewhere in town and have a drink?" He thought it was a good idea, so we got into the jeep and drove to the town hall in the vicinity of which we hoped to find a bar. The town was completely dead. Then it occurred to Urfu was at 10 o'clock, as I myself had ordered. It was now 1:15. What was to be done? We then spotted a fiacre, at that time the most general means of transport, standing all by itself with the driver asleep on the box. "Monsieur," we shook him awake. He saw our uniforms and stammered in dismay. "Mon général, I have a family. I fell asleep for God's sake." We reassured him. "That's all right. But do you know where one can still get a drink?" "Non, monsieur. Everywhere is closed because of the couvre-feu. Everyone is afraid. There is still a Maison Screws, of course, but I do not know if they will be open for you." We had no idea what a Maison 6 Rieux might be, but we were prepared to risk it. So we let ourselves be taken by the driver to our hoped-for drink. The streets became narrower and narrower, the district more and more dubious. Now and then we thought we were being watched from behind curtains. Gradually our situation became uncomfortable. "Where are you taking us, monsieur?" "Voile." We were there. He climbed down from the box and knocked at the door. An elderly lady appeared. "Please come in, General." She promoted me just to be on the safe side. One can never tell. I impressed upon the driver that he was to wait for us if he valued his life. No sooner had we stepped inside than we realized the meaning of a maison sérieuse. It was a brothel, admittedly in the French manner. The furnishings were of quality, Madame was very kind, and the girls made a good impression. "Madame," I tried to explain our presence. "Until the surrender of the town, we are the responsible German officers of Bordeaux. We really only wanted a drink, but were caught out by the curfew we ourselves had ordered. You are very welcome. Let's drink a glass of champagne to celebrate the end of the war. We women are always the moomers." After half an hour of lively conversation on the sense and senselessness of the war, we took our leave, not without assuring the old lady that we would recommend her establishment to the local German headquarters. She was highly delighted and gave us her visiting card. Our driver was asleep again, but he was there, thank goodness. We trotted slowly back to the town hall, where our jeep was 56 Panlik Commander waiting. The driver refused any money. When I paid him liberally all the same, he called out, "The Germans are not half as bad as we have been told. I will wait for you here, mon Gingral, every evening until curfew, in case you need me." And he trotted off contentedly. Pétain, meanwhile, had left the city with his provisional government. The ceremonial entry of our division had been fixed for the day after, with a march past before our corps commander, General Hoth. I reported back to Rommel, and could not help telling him about the Maison Sérieuse, which much amused him. Our 7th Panzer Division was transferred to the area west of Bordeaux. Further orders were to follow. I managed to get permission from Rommel to move with my reconnaissance battalion to Arcachon, the delightful seaside resort on the Atlantic coast, in the lee of the Cap Ferret Peninsula. There among the dunes, I set up my headquarters in one of the pretty summer villas. For a few days we enjoyed bathing in the sea, fresh oysters, which were collected every day from the oyster beds, and the delicious dry white wine. The end of the French campaign could not have turned out better. Every war brings with it, through the shifting of theatres of action, longer or shorter pauses, the periods between campaigns. These pauses are of great value, both for the individual soldier and for the community. Everyone tries to mobilize his mental forces and is ready to suppress negative experiences and assimilate even the slightest positive ones. People encourage each other and strengthen one another in the hope that at some point in time they will be able to escape this constant mortal threat forever. Probably every soldier finds out in the course of a war that he can only bear the having to kill and being killed over long periods if he adopts the maxims of the Stoics, learn to endure all things with equanimity. He can only do this if he builds up an immune system of his own against the feelings of fear and sympathy, and probably, to a certain degree, even against matters of ethics, morals, and conscience. He cannot afford to question the whys and wherefores of the things that happen around him and in which he himself has a part. He must act and apply his whole concentration to that. He learns through a long process of habituation to suppress images of horror, to distance himself from his neighbor in order to remain capable of rational action. If he manage, his chances of survival increase. These thoughts and emotions were at work in us now, after the end of the French campaign. We knew that our families at home were suffering from anxiety about their sons and husbands. We all felt genuine grief for our dead and severely wounded. We thought also of the losses we had inflicted on our opponents. Predominant, however, was joy that we had survived thus far. The Navy and the Luftwaffe remained in action. The first Allied air raids on our industrial centres and communication networks made our own country a theatre of war for the first time. Rommel flew to Vienna, his last garrison before the war, for a few weeks' leave, to relax with his wife Lucy and his young son Manfred. Through close friends on the general staff, I learned that Hitler had tried to conclude a separate peace with Britain. To him, the British, besides the Scandinavians and the Germans, of course, were members of the Germanic race, whom he secretly admired. But he seemed to have completely misjudged Churchill, who, as we gathered from the British news bulletins, was determined to destroy Hitler and his National Socialism. In July, our division was transferred to the area west of Paris. Rommel came back and told us that Operation Sea Lion was being prepared, the invasion of Britain. The 7th Panzer Division was among those earmarked for the operation. This was the start of wearisome weeks and months of preparation. On converted barges and a few special ships, loading and unloading was practiced again and again under combat conditions. But our impression was that the preparations for Sea Lion were half-hearted, as the Luftwaffe was losing the Battle of Britain. I moved with my reconnaissance battalion to the Parisian suburb of Le Vésinet, which lay on a loop of the Seine west of Paris. Living in the villa opposite was Josephine Baker. Our neighbour was the owner of the Lido, which he reopened with a new show immediately after the armistice. Our villa belonged to a Swiss national who wanted to return to Switzerland, as he was unable, for the time being, to do any business in Paris. He saw us as a guarantee that he would one day find his villa again intact. I do not know how long we shall be staying here, but do not worry. I will keep everything in order, I promised him. He showed me around the villa and the wine cellar. Please help yourself as often as you like. I declined his generous offer with thanks. Finally, we agreed on a token price of 1 franc per bottle of his fine old wines. I particularly enjoyed a 1929 Chambertin. My men were quartered in a sanatorium. A baroness was the spokeswoman for the citizens of Vésinet. She praised our behaviour. Friends were made, but this had nothing to do with so-called collaboration, which was later to be punished so gruesomely by the French. July 1940, Paris was on our doorstep. Military headquarters had been set up, and entry to the city was permitted only with a special pass. I obtained one of these passes and spent all my spare time refreshing my memory of this unique city and exploring the individual quarters. One evening, I happened to go into Le Cavalier, a bar in the vicinity of the Champs-Élysées. Its proprietor was Clément Duhor, an Olympic athlete in 1932 and a well-known chanson singer and later film producer. We took to each other at once, and Le Cavalier became my regular bar. There one met no Germans from the ever more swollen administration, who often behaved overbearingly as victors. They were the ones who had never heard a shot, let alone taken part in the war. It was often embarrassing when drunken members of the military administration sang Nazi songs in the bars, while the French customers would have liked to bear chansons. Once, when it became too much for me and physical violence threatened to break out, I called the military police and had the place cleared of rowdy Germans. At Clermont-Duour, I came to know a number of French artists. I wore civilian clothes to avoid provocation. I also met J.B. Morel there, who is still one of my best friends today. He was an interior decorator and seemed to know everyone and everything in Paris. He was my own age and had fought against me as a lieutenant. He lived in a delightful apartment in the Rue du Dobropol, near the old Tivoli Gardens by the Bois de Boulogne. Through him, I gained access to circles that otherwise wanted no contact of any kind with Germans. Evening, he took me to a jazz cellar, in which prohibited black American jazz was played and swing music, unknown to us. There one could only get in by a special knock. In the Mood by Glenn Miller and Down Mexico, Way became two of my favorite tunes. Later in captivity, we were to play them ourselves. With my special pass and the faithful Mercedes Cabriolet, I had no difficulty in roaming about Paris with my new French friends. They were often my guests in Le Vésinet, where we would go out in one of the motorboats lying in the marina for a trip on the Seine, or cross over to Le Pec to eat in the famous restaurant Le Coq Hardy. My men used their war pay to buy things for their families, which we had long had to do without at home, such as silk stockings, perfume, fine materials, and drinks. Hitler had established an exchange rate that was highly favourable to us. At the end of August, I received 14 days' leave. That, for me, was a further sign that no one in the leadership planned on a landing in England anymore. I decided to spend the 2 weeks in Bad Kissingen, my last garrison, to visit friends and settle a few matters. I would take along my orderly and trusted friend Eric Beck, who wanted to go home. Beck, get the Mercedes ready. I am going to take Boy 2, the setter, to put him into safe keeping at home. Captain. Beck came to me excitedly. I have found a brand new Buick in the garage. Could not we go in that? No one has ever seen an American car at home. I let myself be persuaded and actually got papers and army license plates from military headquarters. In Kissingen, the spa season was well underway, albeit on a restricted scale, and I drove around the district proudly with pretty girls in the much-admired Buick. The setter boy went to a forester in the Rowan Mountains, where he unfortunately died later of a virus infection, while we were in Russia. When we returned to Vésinet after the visit, I decommissioned the Buick and put it back again, clean, in the garage. In October, Operation Sea Lion was called off. Our Air Force, after heavy losses, had been unable to gain ascendancy. The Navy had insufficient capital ships to cover a crossing of the Channel effectively. How should things continue now, if a landing in England was not possible? We had occupied almost all of Europe, it is true, but uncertainty still hung over the Mediterranean, from which no good news was coming. Through the non-aggression pact with Stalin, we had secured our back. But how should we deal with the British? They had been forced to leave almost all their material behind on the mainland, and had lost a not inconsiderable number of prisoners. But the mass of the British army was still intact. The material was steadily being replaced from America, in spite of the heavy losses inflicted on the British in the U-boat war. The British Air Force was gradually acquiring superiority. Churchill let there be no doubt that he intended to destroy Hitler and his National Socialism. After the abandoning of Operation Sea Lion, our division received orders to move to the Bordeaux area. Movement again at last. I said goodbye to our friends in Vésinet, and to my friends J.B. Morel and Clermont-Duour. Hans, they both said to me, you can no longer win this war, we know that. Clement even suggested that in an emergency, I should take refuge with his mother in the Basque country. You would be safe there. We Basques never betray a friend. He meant it well, but for me it was naturally out of the question. After that, he gave me a silver ring with a Basque motto, the French translation of which was engraved on the inside. It is better to think than to speak. I could not shake off the feeling that the two friends belonged to the resistance, which was becoming ever stronger. This belief would later turn out to be true. But our friendship was to prove stronger and more important than betrayal and cravings for revenge. On our long march to Bordeaux, we stopped for a day's rest at one of the old Rothschild chateaux. There, I was visited by one of my older friends, Siebel. He had been a fighter pilot in the First World War and was the inventor of the Siebel ferry, which was to save many men in North Africa from being taken prisoner. Siebel mounted old aircraft engines on ordinary ferries and used their propellers to drive them, thus bridging the short link between Tunisia and Sicily in one night. On arriving in Bordeaux, I could not help calling at the Maison Screuse. I was greeted effusively, Mon Graal, we have been officially recognized by military headquarters. I am very grateful to you.